The Meaning of Education by W.E.B. Du Bois. This succinct account of Du Bois's views on education in the latter half of his life was among the papers left in my care, says Herbert Aptheker, but there was no indication of date or the circumstances of its delivery. It is my guess that this was a lecture probably in 1944 or possibly 1945 at a class in some local educational institution. You are, of course, aware that a new branch of learning has recently become popular, which is called semantics. Semantics has to do with the meaning of words and takes up the fact that very often we use the same word unconsciously with different meanings, so that what is true of the word in one meaning is quite untrue in another meaning. For example, the word mine. If I'm a child in Congo and I am mining minerals that are not mine, according to... I want to call your attention this morning to some differences of meaning in the word education. For some weeks, you have been studying education, and more or less unconsciously, you have assumed that you mean by education always the same thing, but you do not. There are few words in modern use which vary so much. In order to make clear what I mean, I want to go over first the meaning of education in my life. From the age of 5 through my 26th birthday, over 20 years were spent almost entirely in receiving an education according to the preconceptions of the late 19th century. Of course, my course of education was as follows. First, I had long and rather severe discipline in the 3 R's, in reading, writing, and arithmetic, so that the spelling and grammar of the English language, the usage in phrase, became deeply grounded and second nature to me at an early age. Then, I began to study what had happened in the past in this world, the history of the United States, of England, and something of Europe. I began the discipline of languages, of ancient languages which had been used by civilizations now partially dead. I studied their literature, and English literature by reading essays and books. I began to learn about the lives of certain men, most of them men of unusual ability and distinction who had left their imprint upon the world. Of the things which I had learned, I began to write in essays and statements. Then I had courses in natural sciences, in chemical laboratories, in physical, algebra and geometry, in studying rocks and stars. With this went a rather unusual amount of travel, so that I had a chance of comparing people with people and land with land. I listened to lectures by distinguishing students of science and history. I heard music in wide variety. I saw most of the leading examples of painting and sculpture throughout Europe. Now, at the end of these 20 years of study and travel, which must have cost in the aggregate something like $40,000, mind you, this man, for 20 years of education, paid $40,000 maybe, and Howard is saying that is less than the cost of a single year there. I was not prepared to do any specific piece of work. I could not make a table or cook a meal or sew on a button. I could not carve nor paint, and the art of writing and revealing my thought had not been developed. On the other hand, I did not have a rather firm grasp and idea of what this world was. I did have a rather firm grasp and idea of what this world was, and how it had developed in the last 1,000 years. I knew something of the kind of human beings that were on earth, what they were thinking and what they were doing. I was able to reason rather accurately. And whatever there was that I had not been trained to do, the specific training that was necessary came rather easily because I had this general grasp. Nevertheless, as I came into the 20th century, I was aware of the widespread criticism of the sort of education which I had had, and the questioning in the minds of men as to how far that sort of education was really valuable and how far it could be applied to the youth of today. More especially during the present war, this criticism has been sharpened and emphasized in the United States. We have seen young people who had training in mechanics easily get jobs that paid wages almost fabulous. In the great munitions factories, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and even children have been working at wages between $5 and $15 a day. There has been a special demand for people who knew how to apply the newly discovered laws of physics and electricity, for experts in radio, for people who could make and manipulate airplanes. Of all the different branches of knowledge, perhaps chemistry has loomed largest. There has been the development of the combustion engine, the making of plastics, the substitution of new materials like nylon and synthetics for the older threads. This has made the people say, and doubtless you have had it emphasized here, that what education ought to do is to prepare young people for doing work of this sort, and that it is a great waste of time to study what we used to call the humanities and art and literature over periods which counted up into decades, rather than in a few years of intensive work made a man a capable workman in some trade or art where he could get an immediate and comfortable salary. Now, despite this, we look upon a curiously contradictory world. The technical advance of Western European civilization in the last century has been the most marvelous thing which the world has seen. It can, without exaggeration, be called miraculous. Personally, I never can get over the unreality of travel by airplane. When I was a boy, we typified the impossible by comparing it to flying. Now we fly easily and with astonishing safety around the world. But not only that, we talk over immeasurable distances. We transport goods and ideas. We have a world whose technical perfection makes all things possible. And yet, on the other hand, this world is in chaos. It has been organized twice in the last quarter of a century for murder and destruction on a tremendous scale, not to mention continual minor wars. There is not only this physical disaster, there is the mental and moral tragedy which makes us at times despair of human culture. Now, when we compare the technical mastery which man has over the world with the utter failure of that power to organize happiness and peace in the world, then we know that something is wrong. Part of this wrong lies in our conception of education. There are two different things that we have in mind in education. One is training for mastery of technique. The other is training the man who is going to exercise the technique and for whom the technique exists. If, regardless of the person themselves, we train their hands and their nervous system for accomplishing a certain technical job, after that work is done, we still have the question as to why it is done, and for whom, and to what end. So, for example, like if you're going to be there's jobs that are, like last summer, I was going to take a job for an AI company where I was supposed to submit to it various different creative writing and see what it said about that stuff. And I realized quickly I didn't take a single job from it. I didn't take any contracts. But I realized, that was just feeding it to be able to then have the output of my voice within it. And I was like, yeah, I can't do that. So it doesn't matter that like, oh, they're gonna train you to be a data labeler or something in this like AI gig economy. What the question of it is for is so that they can increase the data sets that they have available to then deploy these in future generations of robotics and other algorithmic industrial techniques that will, as they say themselves, create a permanent underclass because they won't need us to do the work. They'll have a team of AI agents and robots. You just have to be able to afford it. What is the work of the world for? Manifestly, it is for the people who inhabit the world. But what kind of people are they? What they are depends upon the way in which they have been educated and initiated. That is, the way in which their possibilities have been developed and drawn out. It is a misuse of the word education to think of it as technical training. Again, the reason I keep saying initiation is Sylvia Winter. She said in an interview with Bedouin Allegra, I think it's called What Will Be the Cure, that we would do better to think of education as initiation because, as she learned from studying Congolese society, When the society began to be unstable and experience crisis, they doubled down on their initiation systems in order to produce new equilibrium. It is a misuse of the word education to think of it as technical training. Technical training is of immense importance. It characterizes civilization, but it is of secondary importance as compared with the people who are being civilized and who are enjoying civilization or who ought to enjoy it. Manifestly, the civilized people of the world have got to be characterized by certain things. They must know this world, its history, and the laws of its development. They must be able to reason carefully and accurately. Attention must be paid to human feeling and emotion, which determine and guide this knowledge, and reason and action must follow a certain pattern of taste. These things, knowledge, reason, feeling, and taste, make up something which we designate as character, and this character it is which makes the human being for which the world of technique is to be arranged and by whom it is to be guided. Technique without character is chaos and war. Character without technique is labor and want. But when you have human beings who know the world and can grasp it, who have their feelings guided by ideals, then, using technique at their hands, they can get rid of the four great evils of human life. These four evils are ignorance, poverty, disease, and crime. They flourish today in the midst of miraculous technique and in spite of our manifest ability to rid the world of them. They flourish because, with all our technical training, we do not have in sufficient quantity and for a long enough time the education of the human soul, the training of people to know and think and guide their feelings by science and art. Now, it is difficult to apply this broad and fundamental initiation. There is about it something intangible. It varies from individual to individual. Nevertheless, it is the fundamental element in education. It can be handed on from teacher to pupil only in case the teacher himself has mastered the requisite knowledge, discipline of mind, and organization of emotion. Without that fundamental endowment, there can be no real teaching. No dexterity in technical manipulation can for a moment in school or in life become a substitute for the trained and disciplined mind which knows the world. I maintain, therefore, and this is the object of my talk, manual training is not education. Education is the development of the higher human abilities. Manual training, technical efficiency are of tremendous importance in a civilized world, but only as they become tools in the hands of people who are educated and civilized. Otherwise, they throw the world into disorganization and war.